Welcome to another leathercraft tutorial by MPR Leatherworks. In this video I will show you how to make the cheesy leather shoulder bag using the PDF pattern that can be found on our website and Etsy store. See the links in the description below. My daughter saw a similar bag online and wanted one, but a little bit bigger. So I got to designing one for her and made the PDF available for you to make your own. A list of project requirements are included in the PDF pattern. So let's get started. Print the pattern and check that the pattern sizing is correct by using the test page. The pattern is available as a letter or A4 size. The pattern can be printed in black and white. Cut the pattern out. There are parts of the paper pattern that needs to be joined as indicated on the pattern. Join the pattern where necessary using masking tape and trim the pattern just outside the cut lines. Do this for all the pattern pieces that are not marked as a lining. There is also a pattern for the lining. Here I am showing the pattern piece for the gusset lining, and I have left a section on the short sides for a potential hem. You can apply the lining in one of two ways, either by hemming the lining or by covering the lining edge with a piece of leather. See parts labeled F. This may sound complicated right now, but just keep watching the tutorial and I will explain the options more clearly as we proceed. The pattern for the lining can be trimmed exactly on the cut lines, whereas the pattern for the leather will be trimmed just outside the cut lines. For the lining, I have used a suede type of fabric. It is not real suede, but what is nice about this fabric is that its edges can be seared with a flame so that the fabric does not fray. And of course I like the cheesy color of it. You could also choose to make the bag without the lining. Next, tape the pattern pieces to the leather. Here are the pieces for the thinner leather. And then the rest of the pieces for the thicker leather. Now punch all the holes in all the pieces of leather. You will need round or half round punches to punch the cheesy holes. I just want to encourage you again to please watch this tutorial completely before starting the project, as it will make much more sense once you've seen the entire project. Okay, so here I have punched all the holes as indicated on the pattern, except for a couple of holes in part B. Now please take note that on part B I've also not on this video shown the staggered cut lines, and the reason is because I had only incorporated this after I'd shot the video. So just keep, as I say, just keep watching, it will all make sense soon. But part B, we only punch the holes up to the grey line on the pattern. And the reason for this is that part B will be attached to part A, which forms the lid. Part A is the back of the bag plus the lid. So when part B is added to part A, and if we add it together when it's flat, when we fold the lid over, bend it into shape, you will find that the inside leather, the part B, will want to make a bubble, like I'm going to show you here. So that thinner leather is going to be attached to the thicker leather, and then when we fold it, it's going to want to bubble, and we don't want that to happen. So we're going to attach it while it is bent, but I'm going to show you this exactly on the video as we proceed. Groove the leather on the parts as indicated on the pattern, on the gusset and also on part A. Here the blue lines again indicate those staggered lines that I spoke about that I hadn't done when I shot this video at this point, but you can cut them now. The yellow lines show where you need to skive the leather on the fresh side of the leather. Then you can stain your leather to whatever color you want. So all the parts are now prepared, holes are punched, staining is done. And then on part B, we also stain the back of the leather because the back will show through on the front of the bag through the cheesy holes. So just make sure you also stain the reverse side of the leather of part B. And the same goes for parts E. We will stain parts of the inside because that will show through the holes on this part. So keeping with these parts, we're going to add a D-ring to parts E1 and E2. So you'll just have to roll the leather up a little bit and to fit the D-ring over it. And you'll do that for both of them. And these parts will now be stitched to the gusset. Just make sure that before you stitch parts E to the gusset, that parts E, the edges, you've burnished them, that they neat, because once they're stitched you won't be able to finish the edges off nicely. So we'll start by doing that. Once we've stitched that, the stitching will be on the inside, and then we can put the lining on the gusset to hide the stitches. I have stitched parts E to the gusset, and now for the lining, which we will be gluing to the leather. When doing so, make sure that there is a small gap between the edge of the leather and the edge of the lining, so that the lining does not stick out at the join or the seam of the leather when it is assembled. So here I will talk about the two options for the lining. You can either lay the lining flat and then add parts F, which is the leather strip, to the top, which is the option I'm going to be doing. Or you can choose not to use the leather strip and fold the lining over to form a hem. Whichever method you use, just make sure you glue the parts down properly. The difference between the two methods will be seen once the bag is stitched together. If you only hem the fabric lining, then when the bag is stitched together, there is a smoother join of the leather at the seam. But if you add the leather strip, part F, this part will be included in the seam where the leather is joined, and this will make this section a little more bulkier than the rest of the bag seam. So if you choose to add the leather strip, make sure you skive the edges of the leather strip down so that the seam of the leather is as close together as possible. With the lining of the front panel of the bag, part C, you could also make a hem and not add the leather strip, which is part G. But in this case, part G, which is the leather strip, does not extend to the seams of the leather bag, so you can comfortably use the leather strip here without having that bulkier seam that you would with a gusset. I will be using the leather strip, and therefore I will trim the lining to fit exactly to the leather piece. Of course, keeping that small gap between the edge of the leather and the edge of the lining. But before I glue the lining, I first have to add the magnetic closures. You will need 2 sets of magnetic closures. The magnetic closures consist of 2 parts, a thicker and a thinner section. So on part C, the front part of the bag, we will use the thicker part of the magnetic clip. So add the clips as shown here in the video and fold the metal feet over and make sure they are affixed nice and securely. Then you can glue the lining to the leather. You could also first glue 2 smaller strips of material over the backs of the magnetic closure and then glue the lining on top of that. This will just help protect the lining a little bit more from wear and tear, which will just give the bag a little bit of a longer wear and tear lifespan. The other parts of the magnetic closure, the thinner pieces, are added as shown here. Again, make sure they are attached nice and firmly. Here I'm just showing you how to mark the groove on part A if you have not done so already. The groove will help the fold of the lid of the bag. Also use this groove line as a marker. You will glue the lid, the part with the cheesy holes, from the groove line down to the front of the bag. And make sure the glue does not seep out where the cheesy holes are. So once you've glued those 2 parts together in that section as indicated, you can also glue the lining to the other end of part A as shown here. So here all the lining has been glued to the leather parts. So on the gusset I've glued the lining, and now I'm just going to wet the groove lines and I'm going to fold those end pieces over a bit just to form the leather a bit. We'll get back to the gusset shortly. In all the parts where you've glued lining to the leather, go again with your hole punch and punch through all the holes again so that you make sure that wherever the lining is covering the holes of the leather, that you've punched through it, so when you come to stitching that you won't have problems in stitching. On part A, we're also going to moisten the groove line and where the lining ends, and we're just going to fold the bag over, just form it slightly, and we need to do this before we can glue that center section. Okay, so the center section will have all these slits cut into it as I've been explaining earlier. So what we're going to do now is we're going to glue the edges. We're going to apply the glue and then we're going to fold the bag and then attach the 2 pieces together in a folded position. And this will make so that when we open the bag, the leather will stretch, but when we close the bag, the leather won't make a bubble. So here I've applied the glue, and you see I haven't put the glue in the center because we want that leather to stretch. So just add enough glue on the edges, then fold the leather over and then glue that leather together in the folded position. Make sure the leather is glued nice and securely before you proceed with the project. You don't want that piece of leather now to move as you carry on with the rest of the project. So once it's glued nice and securely, you're basically going to turn this piece of leather over and you're going to punch through the holes that are existing in part A. So you're going to punch through the leather, that center piece that we've just glued down. We're going to punch all those holes through and we're going to cut those little half circles out as well. So now all the pieces that have lining attached to it, I have re-punched all the holes again to make sure that there's holes going through wherever the lining does cover the holes. And here on part A, you will see that I've punched through the holes all the way through the center section that we've just glued together. You can sand the edges to make sure that the leather is flush with each other. Okay, so back to the gusset. The gusset will be attached to the bag as shown here. And you can choose with the gusset which way around you want to attach it, because the tops of the gusset, those pieces that fold over, they slanted. So you could have the wider part at the back or the wider part in the front. I'm going to have the wider part at the back of the bag. And then the first hole of the gusset will be stitched where the two lines intersect. Okay, so now I'm going to add this strip, and it's going to be stitched together with the gusset. So firstly I'm going to glue the strips into place and make sure you glue them nice and securely right up to the edges. And then on the front of the bag, I've also glued this strip to the front of the bag. Now lastly, before we stitch the gusset, wet the edges where the holes are punched, and then use some calipers to make a line just on the inside of the stitching holes, and fold the leather over a bit. This just forms the gusset a bit better. It will make stitching easier, and it will give more shape to the bag. So this is quite important that you do fold that stitching line where all the stitching holes are, that you fold them over a bit. So once you're at this point, you can now start to attach the gusset to part A. And again, you can choose which side you want to start with, it does not matter, and you'll align the holes as indicated here. Just stitch all the way around the gusset till you get to the end. On the front part of the bag, I have just stitched across where the leather strip is. I've stitched all the way across from the one end to the next, and then the gusset has been stitched to the bag as shown here, just all the way around. So the next step is to stitch across the inside of the bag as shown, and then all the way around the lid. Once you've done that, you're going to stitch the front part of the bag to the gusset. So all the stitching is done. Now sand the edges and burnish the edges. I added some color to my edges just to give it that extra cheesy look. And then when you close the bag, you might find that the magnetic clips don't align quite properly. That just means you need to form the bag a little bit more, work on the folds, and then also work from the inside of the bag and just make those magnetic clips pop out a bit more so that the magnetic clasps find each other nicely and clip closed without any hassles. The next part is to add the strap. So for the strap, cut the strap to the length that you desire, and then cut the ends of the strap according to the pattern, and then add some swivel hooks to the end. And again, I have to just fold the leather a bit, roll it up to get those swivel hooks over the leather. Once the swivel hooks are on, just fold that leather tab over and stitch the two parts together. Then simply clip the strap to the bag. And that's basically the bag done. I have also added a slice of cheese for decoration, and I added a chain with a jewelry lobster claw, and I've just attached that to the D-ring. You could also attach it to the swivel hook. It's just for some decoration. And your bag is done. Thanks for watching, and follow us on social media, and also visit our website for more patterns and tutorials.